Hi, I'm Wayne Tuttle, and this is Chasing Legends. Welcome back to Chasing Legends. Please go down, hit subscribe, hit the notification bell to get the updates of all our upcoming videos, and go to our website, www.legendofsuperstitionmountains.com. You can get everything, all kinds of information, archival stuff there. Right into it right away. Now, this week we're going to do a video when we talked about how I'm going to be doing some videos on location in a number of different areas. But the problem is we've missed a couple of those trips because of circumstances beyond our control. So because of that, this one was one I wanted to get to, and we actually should have been actually out there and done, and it just didn't happen. But I still wanted to get to it. And one of the problems with it is it's one of those videos where someone else does videos and they do something about the story subject. And I mean, the very least you should get the name correct, right? But they didn't do that. And then the other problem I have is it really storytelling if you literally physically can see you reading the book on the camera? So if I'm sitting here holding Tom Collenborn's book and start reading word from it, am I really doing a video on this subject like I'm a storyteller? No, I'm reading you a story out of a book. We're not going to do that this week. We're going to spell his name correctly, Jay Clapp, otherwise known as Jay Clapp. And we'll talk about a bit of him. We'll get outside the storyline. And I'm not going to quote anything from Thoreau or anything else from the book because I just don't think that's the way everybody wants it. I mean, buy the book. And you can read it to yourself and hear your own voice in your own head. So this week, we will be talking about Jay Clapp. His given name was Jabez Doherty Clapp. He was born in 1911. He lived alone with his mom. His father passed away early. He went to school, graduated high school, went off to college. He graduated college. He was pretty well versed in mathematics and science. He studied astronomy early on there. And in 1951, he moves to Arizona. He always was kind of one of those guys that liked to isolation, get away from everybody, get away from things. He came to Arizona, and he found the Superstition Mountains. And some people referred to him as a hermit of the Superstition Mountains. That also goes with Revis, and then also kind of follows with Ed Buckwitz, because his nickname was the Spook. And they were guys that kind of like went in the mountains and found peace and solace and so forth. And you could, if you're familiar with Thoreau and that type of thing, he seemed to be that kind of character. A bit of an oddball to some people. The one picture I think that they always show and portray of him, it's the late 1950s. He was in a button-up shirt with a tie and a backpack, and he has a bandana on his head. But he was kind of fit like that more academic curriculum type thing. And the people that knew him, that I spoke to, said he was a very nice gentleman, very smart. Anyways, Clapp had a base camp in the mountains. Nobody knew quite where it was. And he spent a lot of his time in the superstitions. What happened and occurred in 1951, he's spending a lot of time in the mountains. And it was in August of 61, his mother contacted the Pinal Sheriff's Department. Said, I haven't heard from my son. It's been about 8 weeks. I haven't gotten any letters. He wrote regularly to her. So the first thing they'd say is, where did he live? He didn't have a known address. It was general delivery. He had a post office box where his mail came and where he sent his mail from. So they contacted the post office, and they said he hadn't picked up his mail since probably either the beginning of July or late June. So then they started to question around, found out one of their own deputy sheriffs had been the last person to see Clapp. He'd taken him out the First Water trailhead and dropped him off for him to hike into his camp. So Jay Clapp had went back in there, and I believe it was June 26, 1961. They know that was the last day he had went in. They began a search. So it took them several weeks to find his base camp, which is a tunnel up in the Hackberry Mesa area. And they found his cot, a number of personal belongings, a few $100s in his wallet and things. They knew he had an expensive camera. It was, I'm trying to remember the Leica camera. They did not find that in there. So they realized his pack and some things were gone. He also was known to be a photographer. So they figured he was out with his camera, with his pack, had been out and done something. So they figured he's got to be missing somewhere in the mountains. So they began an intensive, just area by area search for him. This is basically begins in August of 1961, continues not only for weeks or months, but through the year and beyond. I spoke to a couple people who were involved in the search for him. And they said it was very frustrating because they had no idea. They just kept combing up and down every canyon, every place they could think of. And nothing was heard of Jay Clapp until in March of 1964, a gentleman by the name of David Hermosillo was up in the mountains. And he was in Boulder Canyon, and he came by a camp, and he said you could tell someone had been there, had been abandoned. There was a few things around and a campfire ring and so forth. And he looked around and was thinking it was kind of odd, like someone had been here, but they had left, but they left things. And he started looking around the area, and he found a Leica camera with the initials JC on it. And he realized that's an awful expensive camera just to be sitting out here. He had no idea about Jay Clapp or any of that stuff. So he looked a little further, found some bones and some things nearby. It looked like it had been possibly remains, human remains. So Hermosillo packs out of the mountains and notes the authorities. They try to attempt to reach the camp through first water. I don't understand, and we don't have much of details. One of the problems is if there's a death, but it's not investigated for a homicide or anything like that, if it's considered accidental or possibly natural causes in some way, they don't necessarily open an investigation, and that investigation does not hold over. Only homicides, unsolved homicides, and those types of things, those files are permanent. They're there for record. There's been a few people said, oh, all the Adolph Ruth stuff was thrown out. They never solved the homicide. Well, it wouldn't have been thrown out. It doesn't matter what you did or when you did it. They hold those files. Those are cold case files. They're filed and they're there permanently regardless. That's why they still have cold case files on things that happened over 100 years ago. So in this case, everything's gone. We don't really have much of a record on what they did, but they ended up having to return and try the next week, and they went through Peralta on the south side and managed to reach Boulder Canyon. I may get an interview with Dick Walp, who was involved in the search, and ask him and find out what was the reason, because it seems odd. That was a kind of a bit of a longer way around why they had to go in through Peralta, which seemed to have its own difficulties. But anyways, they got to the camp, found everything, felt like everything pertained to Jay Clapp. One odd circumstance with the entire situation, his skull was missing. They've never to this day found his skull. Recently, someone had mentioned that Adolph Ruth's skull had to be taken physically by a human because an animal would not have carried a skull away. It's happened. Usually when you find something like bighorn sheep, a lot of those animals that have been killed by predators, the mountain lions, you'll find the skulls are removed from the bodies or drugged some distance away. Definitely if the coyotes, mountain lions, they're kind of working over the carcass. So it's believed an animal probably hauled off his skull. He probably died of some mysterious, it could have been accidental, it could have been a mountain lion. We don't know. Jay was at that time about 50 years old, so he didn't seem to be that old. He was a taller gentleman, 6'1", about 150 pounds, so he was kind of a lean, long, tall guy, was known, good health and everything else. So it's a mysterious circumstance of what happened to him, but there was no sense of foul play. His camera was in place and his camp and everything else. Two side note stories that are very interesting and kind of fun to talk about. The first one involved Dick Walp, who I just mentioned, and I will sit with. Dick's an awesome guy, spent a lot of time back in the mountains working with people like Chuck Ayler. He was involved in the search, and when they searched Jay Clapp's mine tunnel and his stuff was there, he talked about a lot of, what they were doing early on in the search. And Dick said that while they were removing his effects out of there after it became publicly known, they were taking back. And he said he had no reason why. And he said it always bothered him, but there was something in the back of his mind. He took a rolled up scroll of paper And he pulled this out, took this and he set it in his car. And they were just kind of like, just probably sent most of the stuff back to Jay's mother. What it was, when you sit for one of those hand sketch artists, a poster, it was a hand sketch artist poster of Jay Clapp in pencil. And I was fortunate enough, and somewhere around, I have a picture of it somewhere, of Bob Corbin and Dick holding it up. It's framed. Very nice thing. Sometime I'll sit with Dick and go through that and his history with Chuck Ayler and a lot of people, which I think everybody find fascinating. But it was very interesting. The other thing about Jay Clapp not mentioned is that he was working for a mineral company. He also was, his job that he generally did and where he made his money, he considered himself, and he was a certified geologist. But no one knows anything about whether he was looking for the Lost Dutchman or mines in there or anything. It seems like he just generally was there as a man of peace. He just went there to get away from society, away from people. He never carried a firearm, and in his entire time in the mountains, there was not one found in his possession, and he was never known to. Now, I said there was two things I was going to add in there, and the second one's very interesting. It's in the early 2000s. I was out in the mountains, and there's a couple little quirks to the story, but I generally, at that time, the only person I was going in the mountains with, if I was going in with just like one other person, was Randy Wright. Randy couldn't make this trip, and the week or two before, I'd went in with my cousin, Chris Hermosillo. It's one of the few trips we ever made in. And I went in, and nobody could go with me, so I went in, and I was going through Second Water and down into Boulder. And I don't think there was anything particular about the hike. I think I just wanted to get out, kind of go out, take some pictures, enjoy my time. I'm going down through Boulder, and I got to the side, and I have no idea where Jay Clapp died or where they found his camp. Tom probably knew. I never was that interested in the story to know the specific spot. I could have it on a map somewhere marked down that I did. And it would be kind of neat. I always thought it'd be better to do the story in his main camp in the Tunnel, where that area was. But I'm going through there, and this guy comes up the canyon, and he looks like he's probably about late 70s, early 80s. Now, you got to remember nowadays, these guys are out there, and they go out, and they're like health nuts and stuff, and they love to hike and backpack. And I've run into these guys that go like, yeah, this is my 420th trip so far since I moved to Arizona through here. And you got the old guys now going up and down and wearing their t-shirts, going up Siphon Draw, What is the one guy, I said his name before, hold on. I can't believe, Flatiron Jim. So they even make t-shirts, and stuff. And hey, good for them, proud, whatever. But anyways, this guy's like that kind of guy. He's like, you're like, should he be out here alone? But he's got, he's got his stuff, a couple hiking sticks. And so I run into him, and I'm sitting down, and I'm rolling a cigarette, and he's talking to me. And he seemed like a very nice guy. And seemed very smart, seemed kind of academics. And we're sitting there talking, and he introduced himself as Jay Clapp. And I was just kind of sitting there like, wow, that's coincidental, because there was a guy named Jay Clapp, and then you don't know how to quite explain it. Yeah, he was in the mountains, and he died somewhere in here. And the guy just kind of nodded and stuff, and I'm just sitting there going like, this is weird. I was just in the mountains with a guy named Hermosillo, and it all was just kind of, I'm sitting there, and then it was kind of like, and he was like, I think from California or someplace, and I'm sure it's not the ghost of Jabez Clapp in the mountains. But it was so funny that it was coincidental that I'm sure you could, and I don't know if he had two P's, Jabez Clapp's name was with C-L-A-P-P, but I thought it was so funny that I'm sitting in Boulder Canyon. Don't know if I'm anywhere near where they found his body, but I run into a guy named Jay Clapp that's never heard of Jay Clapp. I can't remember who I told it to. I came out of the mountains, and I talked to someone a week or two later, and they told me, yeah, that was the ghost of Jay Clapp. I said, well, he modernized, got some new clothes and some nice hiking sticks. But didn't see the camera, and they said, well, that's because he left the camera behind. And they said also it could be, since he was that age, he could have been, I'm like, nah, Jabez Clapp would be like about 100 years old, 90, 100. This guy wasn't quite that old. Anyways, that was kind of, I thought, a funny thing that I ran into Jay Clapp near where Jay Clapp died, and tried to tell him the story of Jay Clapp, but it was kind of weird, saying his head's missing, and, well, this guy had a head completely intact. So there you go. There's the story of Jay Clapp. And I didn't look down at a book hands-free or anything else, or try to read this thing or anything, because I just go in and I look through the file, and I look at it and try to put a little something together there and all. Very interesting. Sounded like a great guy, interesting guy. There's a lot of those really smart guys that get into the Dutchman and get back there and can be great to listen to and talk to and hear their breadth of knowledge of what they bring. But unfortunately, we still never know, and to this day that I know of, I've never heard the story of anyone ever finding the skull of Jay Clapp. So somewhere out in the mountains in Boulder Canyon, washed down, who knows where it could be. So there you go. There's this week's edition of Chasing Legends. But before you go, something important. Coming up next Friday, guess what returns? The episodes of Legend of the Superstition Mountains. That's right, you'll be getting not only us on Monday for Chasing Legends, but you'll be getting the Friday episodes of myself, Frank, and all going back in the mountains and what we were doing through COVID all the way through. So you'll start getting those through in those 12 episodes, and we'll take a break, maybe do a live here or there. But you're not going to get me, my happy face live as much. You're going to be getting the episodes that we've been promising for so long. So I know everybody's going, hooray. And some pretty cool stuff in that. I hope everybody finds that stuff interesting and continues to watch. So I hope you enjoyed everything. The Tom Collenborn driving down Apache Trail and all these other things and archives we've been sending you. You'll be getting some more Legends stuff of those episodes, following me and Frank around. And additionally, you can always watch me here on Chasing Legends on Mondays. So thank you for joining us. Looking forward to seeing you guys whichever, whenever, and however. And always remember, I'm Wayne Tuttle, you're not, and this was Chasing Legends.